So, rev share. So yeah, kind of, this all got flipped around in the last week or so with this. Just kind of walk us through this and kind of, kind of provide the context you just did, but if you can break it down any further for us.
Well, first, Zach, thanks for the opportunity to spend a little time together. So we're now into year 4, going into year 5 of what was NIL, right? Name, image, likeness, and that will transition after the House settlement. Everybody had Monday the 7th circled on their calendar as the House settlement date. And what happens when the House settlement is approved, and we believe it will be approved, it will clear the way for revenue sharing, for expanded roster limits, which allows us to scholarship more student athletes at a heavier level. And the revenue share component is simply this. It's old NIL, except the ability now for athletics departments to accept checks and distribute those funds. And so we're really going, from a donor's perspective, we're really going back to where we have been the last 40 years, which is those initiatives through athletics, those generous donations can be made out to Shocker Athletics, and now we have the ability to collect and distribute funds, whereas pre-House, it had to be done through a third-party collective.
Which it felt like, when it initially happened, it kind of confused me. It almost felt unnecessary then, where it was like, we're paying players, why do we have to kind of hide it behind a commercial or an advertisement or something? Do you feel like this just kind of, I don't know, almost opens it up, or we all know what we're dealing with now?
I think it simplifies it, and I think I've heard from a lot of our generous donors that they feel a little bit better about writing a check to Shocker Athletics, who's been here for 106 years, as opposed to a collective that just spun up within the last year, and ensuring that the dollars were out in the right way. I think there's a different level of trust with that. That being said, our partners on the collectives the last 3 or 4 years have been really good to us, and they've done things really well. But I think it's a little bit more comforting, maybe a little bit more soothing for our donors.
Your open letter last week to Shocker Nation, walk us through. Obviously you guys still need to, it's not just $1 million now, it's going to be probably $1 million after that. It's just going to keep going. You guys are going to always need more money, but kind of walk us through what the $1 million goal is.
I think maybe you start from a context standpoint is most everybody that I talk to and engage with, they want a championship level basketball program. Well, you can look at championships, right? We've got to align resources to championship expectations. And for us, what that means is we don't have to be number 1 in our league if we're expecting league championships. We do need to be in the neighborhood, right? And we don't have to have the nicest house in the neighborhood, but in the neighborhood for us is in the top 3 in our league. And we know, based on the data that we've had access to and the conversations that we've had within our league, we have a really good idea, a very strong conclusion that we will be in the top 2, maybe 3 in our league with the resources that we have planned for next year's team, okay? But that level of resources does not necessarily equate to championship level in the American, doesn't necessarily equate to Sweet 16 level. And so that's the gap that we're talking about in the letter of approximately $1 million based on the data that we have, which is fairly reputable and reliable data. We feel like we need to close the gap about another $1 million for us to be able to provide the roster resources for the depth and the talent that's going to be required for us to get into the Sweet 16.
Does it feel like that money is going towards, here's my whole thing about it. I think we saw it in the NCAA tournament, and I don't think anyone wants to see this, but does it feel like we're watching the death of mid-majors in success because these bigger programs can just throw more money, and with the transfer portal being the way it is, I almost am wondering if NIL existed, and Ron Baker, of course, Wichita State legend, but he would have been getting pulled in a million different directions while he was here to go to a different school.
Well, I think I don't subscribe to mid-major concept, because at the end of the day, at any institution, you can decide to fund a program at a specific level where it can actually compete and perform and succeed at a level higher where somebody might identify it as mid-major. So I don't necessarily subscribe to that. What I would say is this: there is a tension associated with where college athletics is right now, and I understand it. I've worked in the industry for 26 years. I was a student athlete for 4 years at 2 different institutions. I transferred, so I understand what that feels like to go through transfers. And here's the tension that exists. If we're being really truthful and genuine and authentic about it, those that have watched and enjoyed the college athletics industry, if you will, the enterprise, don't feel great about NIL and rev share and all of those transactional pieces that lead to roster churn and those sort of things. Our basketball program last year lost 3 to the portal, and the average team in our league lost 8, right? We feel like we will perform better than our average team from a retention standpoint. Obviously, we had a lot of seniors, and we're going to lose a couple of guys this year, but I think you can people that. In other words, I think your coaches can do that. So there's that tension there that exists, but with most everybody that I interact with on a day-to-day basis that might have some disdain or displeasure for where we are as an enterprise, they also want us to win championships. They're passionate about the Shockers. They want us to win conference championships. They want us to get into the NCAA tournament. And those two don't necessarily exist in the same space, because if you subscribe to here and we succumb to that, then we won't fund it at a level where we can accomplish this piece. And I think that's really important for us to understand that, like it or lump it, at the end of the day, if we want to be successful, we want to win championships, that we've got to fund it and align resources to those expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you feel like Wichita State is right now? I know Wichita State's so unique because they don't have a football program, but like, where do you feel like you guys are at right now when it comes to different programs across the
I actually think we have a competitive advantage over most of our peers. If you were to look at the American Athletic Conference, we're the only non-football playing institution. So the data that I referred to earlier that we have access to will show what NIL or revenue share looked like in fiscal year 24. Okay, it'll show how it grew in fiscal year 25. And then it will show how across the league, in men's basketball only, it actually decreases in fiscal year 26, which is next year. Well, you ask yourself, why is that decrease? Because those institutions are putting every dollar that they can possibly put into their football programs, because they have to be relevant in football from a revenue perspective, the television dollars that are associated with that, the donor interest and support, all those things. So for us, we have an ability to invest in a handful of our programs in a different way than anybody else will in our league, and I'm confident in that. And over time, that will relate to, in my mind, a competitive advantage to where we will be positioned uniquely in several of our sports, because we're going to be able to invest in it differently because we don't have football.
Do you guys get a revenue share on the football side, or because you guys don't have a program, do you kind of miss out and you just get the basketball and all the other?
It's a good question. So we share an institutional, I'm going to use the word share a lot, but we share an institutional share with Navy. That was the agreement when Navy was accepted into the league, and Wichita State was in 15-16. Our first competitive year was 17-18. We basically share one institutional unit. There's a percentage that goes to Navy, and there's a percentage that goes to Wichita State. Wichita State realizes all the basketball-related revenue and a certain percentage of the institutional revenue that would go to any one of our peers, whereas Navy receives more of the football revenue and a percentage of that institutional share.
Okay.
Yep.
So, yeah, I guess now it's like you're getting some of the benefits of, having a football program without actually having one and needing to disperse out the cash.
I agree, and I think what's important to note is at a previous institution that I was working at prior to Wichita State, we were going through a conference transition from one league to the next, and the league that we were transitioning into was the Missouri Valley Conference. And so I can say with complete certainty that the dollars that Wichita State receives from the American Athletic Conference is about 3 times the dollars that institutions are receiving in the Missouri Valley Conference. And so I think that's important for our folks to understand. That was a smart move, not only aligning our urban public research institution with other urban public research institutions, it also extended Shocker City, Shocker Select for student recruitment, which is really important to the university, access and affordability, feeding the talent pipeline, and enhancing the economy of Kansas. Like that makes a difference, that we're able to recruit from New Orleans, from Tampa, from Dallas, and other areas that we couldn't recruit in the Missouri Valley Conference. So good move financially, but also a good move from a university growth.
I know this is this would probably be a better question for Paul Mills, but how has this impacted the process of recruiting? Because I feel like I've been hearing of how now agents will reach out to schools, and it just won't be because I mean I played JUCO golf, not exactly the highest level of anything, but it was like you waited on the school to contact you. It wasn't you reaching out to the school to get the scholarship or anything. How is this just? Does it feel like everything's changed around?
Well, it has, but at the end of the day, recruiting athletics is a great thing to be a part of because it changes every year. Everybody's trying to get competitive advantages, right? So it does change. I make it a point to either talk to coach, once a day, or I typically swing through the offices once or twice a day just to kind of see and feel how these guys are managing. And at the end of the day, the answer to your question is it varies where the kid is coming from, right? You have some kids that have been in P4 institutions that might be shifting their focus away from a Power 4 type program, and they're going to approach it a different way than a kid that might be in the SWAC or the MEAC or the Southern Conference that would be coming up. So it varies, but there are agents and advisors involved. There are families involved. There always has been. There's always been advisors involved. There's always been family members involved. For us, and I really appreciate this about Paul Mills because his stance is that you can't, win championships transactionally. There's got to be a relational component. The young people have to be interested in Wichita State basketball, the Wichita community, game days here, what that means to our community, and embracing who they represent. If the conversation is only about dollars and it's only transactional, our guys move on. Our staff moves on because there's a firm belief you cannot win championships with young people that are transactionally minded from that perspective.
Right. Well, I completely understand where you're coming from. Where you still have to build a team. You can't just throw a bunch of players together and expect it to be successful.
And here's the thing, Zach. Recruiting is what recruiting has always been, right? Whether you are a baseball team that had 11.7 scholarships in an old format, or you're a baseball team that has 34 scholarships in the new format, you're still going to miss. Talent evaluation, you're not going to bat 1,000. You're still going to miss. And the hard part in this environment is if you miss with an individual that's earning a significant portion of your revenue share, your roster resource dollars, man, it's tough. So it puts a lot of pressure on our coaches. I will tell you in another answer to your question about recruiting, it's so much more condensed now, right? Coach Mills says this all the time. We could walk into a gym, Zach, you and I, and we could probably point out the top 3 or 4 players from a technical skill and ability perspective. The real work in recruiting is the character evaluation. It's talking to the families. It's talking to the high school coaches, the AAU coaches. If they're transferring from another 4-year institution, it's calling those coaches and having really in-depth conversations. Well, what you have is this compressed, pressured time where kids are trying to make decisions and institutions are trying to get kids to make decisions. So you have to move very quickly. And what we can't afford to do is skip over that character evaluation entirely, but it has to be done in a much more condensed way.
How do and I don't know how much you can actually answer this, but how do the payouts work? Like, do you guys have it tiered where it's like, if we go after a top recruit, they can be in like this tier of amount of revenue sharing, or how do you guys go about, and then how do you pitch it to the athletes?
Well, programs handle it in different ways. I won't get into specifics here, but the reason why you don't get into specifics, I'll say this: there's an appetite for our number to be out there, right? And it changes every year. And we put in our letter that from 22-23 to next year's resources, we see about a 518% growth. It's great growth, right? We should be proud of that, particularly given the first year at Wichita State was 0. We were a year behind. And so when you look at those growth patterns, our year one was a solid year one for NIL, but we didn't do anything here the first year. And so we're really kind of a year behind. That's how we get to that piece. At the end of the day, institutions do it differently. They can do base levels for like a freshman coming in, the number of years you're in the program, you might elevate up to certain levels, but then some programs, it's strictly based on the assessed contributions of a player to your team, and they would compensate a player differently that might be in your 6 or 7 man rotation as opposed to sitting in slots 8, 9, 10, or 11, and your 12, 13, 14, 15 might be at a different level. So it's very much varied.
I do think that this decision has kind of made it where everything is more simple. But let's say, if you don't mind playing a hypothetical game with me real quick, you're the sports emperor, sports czar, whatever you want to call it. Is there anything that you would change? And like, how would you, if you had all the control in the world, how would you kind of try to make this system fit in the way that you think it should?
I think with any industry, with any enterprise, you're a better sports reporter in year 6 than you were in year 1, right? So I think there is a desire to try and get back to more extended retention, right? Which we can build that into revenue share agreements. So I think that piece is covered. At the end of the day, if you talk to any of our industry's leaders, we've got to get our hands around the elements that are in the house settlement, right? Roster maximums, scholarships, rev share. We got to set out a structure for that, guardrails for that. What seems to be very cumbersome to our national association, which is the NCAA, is the constant litigation, right? So I think some sort of limited antitrust protections has really been a buzz phrase for our industry, not looking for carte blanche, but some sort of protection so the NCAA has the ability to actually enforce rules without being sued. So I think that piece is important. And I think competitive equity is important. So as much as you can balance the competitive field, I think the better. The SEC and Big Ten would probably disagree with that comment, but at the end of the day, that's why college athletics is so great, right? Because you've got the Valparaiso that makes the Sweet 16. You've got all those great stories. And this year you saw Sweet 16 with all Power 4 and Big East programs. And so, again, I think our industry is in a state of flux, and I think we'll get to the other side of it where it'll balance out soon.
And do you think, I want to go back to the retention part, is that something where, I don't know if it's technically a contract or whatever the athletes are signing, but is it like now if you sign here and you want to get the full amount of this revenue share, you're going to have to be here for 2 years or 3 years or whatever?
Well, it's like any other contract, right? You could manipulate the term. It could be a 1-year agreement, it could be a 2-year agreement, it could be a 3-year agreement. But with that becomes responsibilities, right? With rights become responsibilities. And so there would be obligations associated with those agreements. But I think it could be variable, but that's all something that could be negotiated as a young person's deciding to come to your institution or not.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just my opinion, but I feel like it is so much harder now for fans of college athletics to get attached to teams. So I grew up in Paola, Kansas. I don't know if you know that's outside of, it's like 45 minutes outside of Lawrence. Mom went to KU. So
I grew up in Manhattan.
Okay, nice. So I grew up a KU fan, and you had Mario Chalmers and Russell Robinson and the Keith Langfords and the Aaron Miles and the Wayne Simmons and all those guys who stayed there for 4 years. Well, when a player stays somewhere for 4 years, the fans get to know him. Ron Baker or Fred Van Vliet, when you have that kind of history with the player, and with the way that the portal is now, some guys are going to be okay. Like, I mean, Corey Washington, he was amazing this past year, and I wish him all the luck, but he was on campus for 9 months? You can't really build a relationship with somebody like that if you're a fan, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's on our athletics department to storytell in a very condensed, just like the recruiting piece is condensed. The player development piece is condensed, because you're going to have an individual that comes on campus in June and might be gone by the next April or May. And so from a development standpoint, man, we better be really efficient. And so I think part of our job in athletics is to endear to our fan base the rosters for our teams. And that's going to take some efficient content creation and distribution and all those things and all the meet and greets that we try to do. It is much more challenging. And at the end of the day, if you were asking me to wave a magic wand, what is the one thing that you would fix about this? Is that I would create a system that's more palatable for our fans, for the folks that are, their hearts and souls and their family histories are in this program. At the end of the day, we're in this thing to build and spread joy, and that's what we want. the unfortunate circumstance in today's environment, it's not impossible to endear your roster to your fan base. It just becomes more of a challenge. And I can tell you, whether it's opportunities for donors to travel with our team to away trips, those have enhanced because we're trying to create those connections. And there's a group of donors that by the end of the season, or season ticket holders by the end of the season, that love these guys. It just takes a little while to get to know them, right? And you may not have the luxury of having them here for 2, 3, or 4 years. That said, Ronnie DeGray was here for 2 years. Quincy Ballard was here for 3 years, right? Harlan Beverly was here for a couple of years. Bijan Cortez was here for a couple of years. His development was phenomenal. Xavier Bell goes from, at one point in 24, he was ranked 91 out of 93 players in our league in Ken Pom. And he goes from that to an all-AC, first team all-AAC player. That's tremendous growth, and our fans got an opportunity to watch that over 3 years, right? So that's what we're always going to endeavor to do, is try to get some roster continuity, because the fan experience is what's really important to this deal.
And I also think with like Xavier's thing, it was awesome watching him grow the way he did, because he's also from Andover Central.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's another unique thing about Wichita State, is the fact that, you know, I mean, TJ Williams is on the team. You know, you have a powerhouse in Heights. You have all these different, I mean, Capon now is a powerhouse. Like, you have all these different area schools that you guys can recruit from as well. But where do you think the state of it all is right now?
I think we're in flux. At the end of the day, to gain predictability, there's got to be some consistency, and we've got to be able to rely on certain elements of our industry. For example, where it sits right now is if you've got a player somewhere in the country that's getting an unfavorable ruling from the NCAA, and they get a local court involved and an injunction gets put in place, for us in our industry, it's like, okay, what can you do and what can't you do? We're trying to navigate that in a responsible way. So I think that piece is in flux. I think we are trying to right a lot of challenges that have existed as a part of the system. At the end of the day, the system is this. It's 500,000 student athletes involved in Division I athletics. It is the most successful grant and aid program next to the GI Bill. I'll give you a local example here at Wichita State. We are 270 student athletes, and we're 50% first-generation college students. So we have half of our young people are coming here, and they're doing something that's never been done before in their families, right? And so when you look at the academic success, 4 out of the last 5 years, they've been at a 3.4 or better, and last fall they had a 3.52 as a full department. Pair that up with 50% first-generation college students, and there's real development going on here. There's professional development, there's career development, there's personal development, and that hasn't changed in the industry despite all the distractions. There's still, we're here to develop young people in programs so they can get their degrees, so they can compete in the sport that they love, and we set them up for the next 40 years of their lives. So to me, that piece hasn't changed, and that's the beauty about what we do.